I remember the exact moment I stopped being afraid of losing everything. It wasn't when I found the texts on Dennis's phone, the ones from my sister-in-law Gwen, that started as prayer requests and ended in something that had no prayer in it at all. It wasn't when Dennis told me over a Tuesday dinner that he wanted out. Said it the way you'd mentioned the weather had turned. Calm and already decided. It wasn't even when Gwen showed up to the mediation in a silk blouse I recognized because I had been with Dennis when he bought it, stood there beside him in that conference room like she belonged to the furniture and slid a check across the table toward me with 2 fingers, casual as a tip at $50,000. Like that was the number. Like that was what 31 years of a life added up to. It was the moment right after that, when my attorney, Helen Marsh, a woman who had been practicing family and business law in Charlotte for over 2 decades and who in all the months we had worked together, had never once changed her expression without meaning to, looked at that check, looked at Gwen, and said, very quietly, very evenly, "That won't be necessary." And something in the way she said it, not sharp, not performative, just certain, made me understand that the meeting we were sitting in was not the meeting Dennis and Gwen thought they had walked into. My name is Loretta, and I am 53 years old. And this is the story of the day 2 people came to collect what they believed was already theirs, and found out they had been reading the wrong deed the entire time. Let me tell you what my marriage looked like from the outside. Greensboro, North Carolina, a 4-bedroom colonial on a cul-de-sac with a magnolia tree in the front yard that bloomed every April without fail. The kind of tree that takes 40 years to get that big and that steady, and that you only fully appreciate once you understand how long things take to grow. Dennis Hale came from a contracting family. His father had started Hale & Sons Construction in the early 80s, as a 2-truck residential operation out of High Point. By the time Dennis's older brother Raymond had moved on to commercial real estate, and left Dennis effectively running the company alone, Hale & Sons had grown into a mid-size regional contractor with a focus on commercial builds. Retail centers, medical office parks, school renovation contracts. Solid work. Steady reputation. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines, keeps the lights on for 43 employees and their families. Dennis was the face of it. Always had been. He had the handshake, the voice, the memory for names that made clients feel like they were the only job on the schedule. He was good at being in a room. What he was less good at, though it took me years of being patient with the consequences, before I would let myself think it plainly, was the part that happened after the room. The follow-through, the contracts. The numbers underneath the confidence, that part had always been me. I had spent the first 7 years of my career in commercial real estate finance, working for a development firm in Raleigh that built grocery-anchored shopping centers across the Southeast. I understood draw schedules and line waivers, and what it meant when a subcontractor invoice didn't line up with a completion percentage. I understood the particular way a construction company could look profitable on the surface and be quietly hemorrhaging money through mismanaged job costing and informal vendor arrangements that nobody had formally reviewed in years. When I stepped out of that career to raise our daughter Phoebe and, eventually, to help Dennis full-time, I didn't stop knowing what I knew. I just started applying it somewhere different. What I did for Hale & Sons over 12 years was not glamorous. It was job cost reports at 10 o'clock at night. It was renegotiating the company's bonding and insurance coverage. When I realized Dennis had been renewing the same policy for 6 years without reviewing the terms, and that the coverage had stopped reflecting the company's actual project scale, it was rebuilding the estimating process from the ground up. After a school renovation project in Burlington came in $340,000 over budget, due to a subcontractor markup structure that no one had questioned because it had always been done that way. It was a line of credit renegotiation with the company's bank that reduced the borrowing rate by 90 basis points and freed up enough liquidity to take on 2 additional contracts the following year without straining cash flow. I never put my name on any of it, not in any formal sense. I was Dennis's wife, I was helpful, I was around, I should have formalized it sooner. I know that now, but for a long time, I didn't think I needed to. Because I had Dennis, and I thought that was the same thing. Gwen came into our lives at a church small group in 2019. She was recently divorced, newly returned to Greensboro after 15 years in Atlanta. And she had the particular energy of a woman who had decided she deserved better than what she'd had, and was prepared to be strategic about finding it. She was warm, in the way that people are warm when they are working, and she latched on to me first, which I now understand was simply the most efficient way in. I introduced her to everyone. I had her over for dinners. I sat with her in the third pew from the front every Sunday for a year and a half, and told her about my marriage, my daughter, my work, my life. The way women tell each other things because it is a gift, and because we do not imagine the gift being used against us. I found out in March. Not dramatically. Not from catching them together or from a confession. From a credit card statement that came to the house instead of the business P.O. box, because Dennis had made a billing error 3 months earlier and never corrected it. A restaurant in Wilmington on a Thursday, when Dennis had told me he was in Raleigh for a pre-bid meeting. A hotel in Asheville on a weekend when Phoebe and I had driven up to visit her college roommate, and Dennis had said he had too much going on at work to join us. 2 receipts. 4 years of something I had not been permitted to know about. I want to be careful about how I describe the 2 weeks after that. What I will tell you is that I did not confront Dennis immediately. Not because I was afraid, and not because I was still hoping I was wrong. I knew I wasn't wrong. I didn't confront him because the part of my brain that had spent 20 years reading financial documents and identifying the place where a story stopped holding together had already started working. Quietly, the way it always did, and it told me that I needed to understand the full picture before I moved. I called Helen Marsh on a Thursday morning. I had gotten her name from a colleague of mine, a woman who had used her 3 years earlier in a business dispute, and who had told me that Helen was the kind of attorney who read everything twice and never let the other side know what she knew until she was ready. I liked that immediately. What followed over the next 2 months was careful and quiet and entirely invisible to Dennis. He and Gwen had, by then, stopped being careful. They appeared together at a Hale & Sons contractor appreciation dinner. In April, Gwen introduced as a friend of the family. In the way people use that phrase when they want the cover, but not the accountability. Dennis began talking openly about the idea of restructuring his life, as he called it. Using the language of someone who had decided the story was already written, and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The mediation was held in a conference room at a law office in downtown Greensboro, on the 6th floor, with tall windows that looked out over Elm Street. It was a Thursday in late May, and the city outside was bright and already warm, the dogwoods long past bloom, and everything settled into that full southern green. That means summer is coming whether you're ready or not. Gwen arrived before I did. I was told this afterward, but I could have guessed it. She had dressed like she was attending a closing. A deep burgundy blazer, pearl earrings, hair pinned back in a way that took effort, and was designed to look effortless. She sat beside Dennis at the far end of the table, which she had no legal standing to do. She was not a party to the divorce proceedings. She was not named in any filing. She was there because she had written the ending of this story in her head, and she wanted to be present when it was confirmed. Dennis's attorney was a man named Clifton Ray, a family law specialist out of Winston-Salem's, with a practiced pleasantness that I suspected covered a fairly narrow imagination about what women in long marriages actually understood about the businesses their husbands ran. He had reviewed the marital disclosure documents Dennis's team had submitted, and had structured a settlement proposal that was designed to move quickly and close quietly. It treated Hale & Sons as Dennis's separate professional asset, minimized the valuation of my contributions, and offered a settlement figure that would have been reasonable if I had been the kind of wife the documents seemed to assume I was. Helen and I sat down across from them. Helen placed a manila folder on the table in front of her, closed and set her pen on top of it and did not uncap the pen. The preliminary statements were exchanged. Clifton Ray made his opening in a tone that suggested he considered this a formality. He spoke about Dennis's central role in building the company, about proportionate distribution, about acknowledging the personal contributions of both parties during the marriage. Helen let him finish. She did not interrupt once. Then Gwen reached into her handbag. I am still not entirely sure what moved her to do it. Maybe she had rehearsed it. Maybe the silence in the room felt to her like an invitation. Maybe she simply could not sit through a legal proceeding without authoring some part of it herself. She withdrew a personal check and held it between her thumb and forefinger, and she leaned forward and placed it on the table, and slid it across to me in one smooth motion. The way you slide a card across a table when you're ending a conversation. $50,000. Her signature in the lower right corner. She looked at me with an expression that had no warmth and no apology in it, only a kind of flat finality. Take this, she said. It's generous. It'll get you settled somewhere comfortable. There's no need for this to get complicated. The room went still. Clifton Ray did not flinch, but he did set down his pen, and the way he set it down, deliberately, without looking at it, told me he had not known this was coming and was recalibrating. Dennis looked at the check, then at Gwen, and his expression was the one I had learned over 31 years was his private signal that something had happened outside the script he was holding, and he did not know his next line. Helen looked at the check for a long moment. Then she looked at Gwen. Then she said, in a voice that was quieter than anything else that had been said in that room, "That won't be necessary." She uncapped her pen. She opened the folder. She did not make a show of it. She simply began placing documents on the table, one at a time, in a row, the way you lay out a hand of cards when you already know what the other players are holding. Clifton Ray leaned forward to read. Then he leaned further forward. In 2017, Helen said, my client entered into a formal consulting agreement with Hale & Sons Construction, LLC. The agreement was drafted by independent counsel, signed by both my client and Dennis Hale in his capacity as sole managing member, witnessed, and filed. It documented the scope of professional services my client would provide to the company in the areas of financial operations, contract administration, and project cost management. She slid one page across, then another. Under that agreement, my client is classified as an independent contractor providing professional services. She is owed compensation for those services. That compensation has not been paid. The outstanding balance, calculated at the agreed hourly rate across documented service hours over 7 years, with applicable interest, is substantial and constitutes a debt of the company, not a marital asset. Clifton Ray's hand went flat on the table. He was reading faster than a man who is comfortable reads. Additionally, Helen continued, my client holds a recorded security interest in the company's primary equipment assets, filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office in 2019, as collateral against a personal loan she made to the business during a period of cash flow difficulty. She slid the UCC filing across the table. That lien predates any restructuring discussions and is senior to the company's existing line of credit. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it, not the tight, held-breath silence of people waiting. The structural silence of a room where someone has just realized that what they thought was a floor is not bearing the load they put on it. Dennis had gone still in a way I had not seen before, not the restless, fidgeting stillness of a man waiting to be handed what he expected. A rigid, pale stillness. The stillness of a man who is doing arithmetic in his head and not arriving at the number he thought he would. Gwen looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Dennis. She looked at Clifton Ray. Clifton Ray was not looking at her. I'd like a recess, Clifton said. Of course, Helen said. He asked for Helen gave it to him. During those 30 minutes, I sat in a small side office with a window that looked out over a parking deck. Helen brought me a cup of coffee that I held without drinking. Outside, someone was maneuvering a pickup truck into a space that was too small for it methodically, without apparent frustration, just steady adjustments until it fit. I watched that for a while. I thought about the afternoon in the summer of 2017, when I had sat across from Helen for the first time, and she had asked me, very directly, whether I had any formal documentation of the work I was doing for the company. I had told her most of it was informal. She had looked at me for a moment and then said that we were going to change that, and that we were going to do it properly, and that I was going to sign it and date it, and we were going to file what needed to be filed, and there would be a record that reflected what was actually true. At the time, it had felt almost excessive. A formality. A precaution for a risk I did not seriously expect to face. I had done it anyway, because Helen had asked me to, and because somewhere in the part of me that had spent 20 years reading the fine print on other people's problems, I understood that the difference between a claim and a documented claim is the difference between a fulfness effect. I want to tell you what the final settlement looked like. But some of the terms are confidential by mutual agreement, and I will honor that. What I will tell you is what mattered. Dennis retained his title and his day-to-day operational role at Hale & Sons. He kept the house on the cul-de-sac, which he had insisted on during the early discussions with a certainty that suggested he thought it was the prize. He kept the truck, the lake lot in Iredell County he'd had since before we married, the golf membership, the surface markers of the life he had arranged around his own reflection. What he did not keep was the illusion that the company was solely his creation, or that the woman he had been dismissing for the better part of 2 years had no legal standing in it. The consulting debt was settled. The lien was addressed as part of the overall resolution. The outcome for me reflected what the documents said was true. Not what Dennis's settlement offer had assumed I would accept. Gwen did not stay for the final signatures. I heard the conference room door open and close, and then she was gone. I didn't watch her leave. I heard later, through Phoebe, who still had mutual connections in Greensboro, that she and Dennis were no longer together by October. No public explanation, no announcement. The way things end when the foundation they were built on turns out to have been someone else's property. Dennis called me once, in November, 6 months after everything was finalized. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he had not understood the full picture. He said he thought maybe we could talk. He sounded like a man who had spent months arriving slowly at a conclusion that I had reached in a noon in a parking deck watching someone park a truck. I did not call him back. Phoebe was the one who helped me move into my apartment in November. It's in a building near Friendly Avenue, 3rd floor, with a kitchen window that catches the light in the morning, in a way that is better than I expected. We spent a Saturday assembling furniture and eating takeout Thai on the floor, and talking until midnight the way we hadn't in years, and at some point she said, "Mom, I didn't know about the consulting agreement. I didn't know you'd done all of that." And I told her I hadn't talked about it much, because at the time it had felt like just another thing you do to take care of what you love. And she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I'm glad Helen knew." I am glad Helen knew too. I consult independently now, mostly small to mid-size construction and contracting companies in the Carolinas, the kind of businesses where the owner is excellent at the work and not always as excellent at the paperwork underneath it. I know how to find the places where a company is quietly losing money through assumptions nobody has examined in years. I know how to read the gap between what a business says it is and what it actually is when you get into the job cost reports, and the vendor agreements, and the line items that haven't been questioned since the company was half its current size. I am good at it. I have always been good at seeing what is actually there. Here is what I keep coming back to. When I think about Gwen sliding that check across the table, she did it because she had already decided what I was. She had listened to me talk for a year and a half in that church small group. She had eaten at my table and watched me manage my household, and heard me describe my work for the company in the passing, uncredited way I had always described it. And she had enfolded from all of that a picture of a woman who was useful but not formidable, present but not powerful, the kind of woman you settle with quickly because she doesn't know enough to push back. She was not entirely wrong about what she observed. I am quiet. I do not take up more space than I need. I have never been the person in the room who makes sure everyone knows what she's doing while she's doing it. She was just wrong about what that means. The check sat on the table for the entire recess, 30 minutes. Nobody touched it. When we came back into the room and the conversations resumed, and everything that needed to be said was said, it was still sitting there, slightly off-center, pushed to the edge of the table by the spread of documents that had, over the course of that morning, replaced the story Dennis and Gwen had come into that room to tell. I left it there when I walked out. It felt like the right punctuation. I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. I want to know your answer. Has someone ever looked at the quiet version of your life? The work nobody photographed, the contributions nobody announced, the years you spent doing the real thing without asking for the credit, and decided that meant you had nothing? And did there come a moment when the truth of what you had actually built, showed up somewhere they didn't expect it. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Subscribe to Selina Payback. A new story every single day.